On behalf of AAEI and as sponsor of this event, I'm pleased to welcome you all and introduce our moderator, Cindy Allen, who's CEO and founder of Trade Force Multiplier, a company that offers a range of services to international trade enterprises, including identifying company and compliance risks, utilizing data analysis. Cindy's been actively involved in international trade uh, for 35 years and has held various positions in the import-export operations, consulting, compliance, automation arenas, and will be leading our discussion on this topic. And we just so happen worked at FedEx together, but at different times. So welcome, Cindy.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. And welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Anyone who knows me knows de minimis is one of the hot topics that I like to talk about all the time. It's something I'm passionate about, probably given, the last 10 years I spent at express companies. But in general, there's been a lot of discussion around low value shipments, including the elimination of de minimis, whether for China or altogether, how that's going to impact if duty is assessed on all goods or just from China. If the de minimis exemption is eliminated, importers are going to face increased administration demands. They're going to have to pay duty. They'll have to make an entire entry, which not many de minimis players have been used to doing. This could also strain resources and disrupt small and frequent import operations that utilize de minimis today. However, on the flip side, retaining de minimis poses compliance risks, as we've all seen in the news. It leads to regulatory challenges and gaps, and does present a challenge when you're talking about facilitation and security together. So this afternoon, Steve and I are joined by two other experts on this who are going to discuss the state of de minimis, some ongoing challenges, opportunities in this area, consider what may change, and how you can be prepared for what lies ahead. First, I'd like to introduce Martin Palmer. He is the co-founder of Hurricane Modular Commerce Limited, a company that provides classification and compliance software for companies involved with international trade. Martin has over 40 years of experience in the distribution and logistics industry, where he has held various senior positions, including serving as the Global Export Controls and Customs Director for TNT Express, which is now part of FedEx. So we've got a little FedEx thing going here. Thanks for joining us, Martin. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Rich DiNucci, Senior International Trade Advisor at Venable. Rich has vast experience at U.S. Customs and Border Protection, where he was actually my boss for a short period of time. And he most recently served as the Director of Field Operations in San Francisco, where he previously served as an area port director for both San Francisco and New York, New Jersey, overseeing immigration and cargo operations at the associated airports, seaports, vast amount of experience. So welcome, Rich. We appreciate having you guys. Thank you. For more information about our panelists, you can click on the resources tab at the bottom of the screen, and please use the Q&A button as we go through this to submit your questions. We're going to take those and address some of them at the end of the discussion today. So to prepare our discussion, please take a moment to answer some poll questions that are going to be coming up on your screen. Do you think de minimis will be eliminated? If so, what impact is that going to have? And would it be, how would that impact be if it's just for China only? So please take a minute to give us your feedback so we can know what you're concerned about. So as we go into the discussion, we're going to break this up in a few different categories, and I'm going to ask each of our panelists to address some of the questions at hand. So first, what is the current state of de minimis right now? Steve, I know you did a recent FOIA request, and you have some statistics and data regarding the HTS codes and some of the volume statistics. So if you could take a few minutes and talk about that and set the stage for what's going on right now in de minimis.
Okay, I'd like to be able to share my screen here. So I am chair of the e-commerce committee for the Trade Support Network. And as part of that, we all hear about all these violations in de minimis, all this smuggling IPR issues. So in order to verify that, I've been doing FOIA requests for the last couple of years. And what I'm going to share with you now is just briefly fiscal year 2023 FOIA data. So just looking at non-express, there were 245 million 321 shipments processed via manifest release. As you know, there are two forms of Section 321 de minimis release. You have manifest release, you have entry type 86, right? The total number of 321 shipments that were used entry type 86 and manifest release by mode of transportation was 1.1 billion last year, with air being the most at 690 million. And I'm just highlighting a couple of these. This report's going to come out in the Trade Support Network website as soon as I'm finished manipulating all the data for 2022 and 2023. So we're just going to cover 2023 today. Number of 321 shipments just processed by manifest release by truck, over 150 million. Customs says due to a system limitation, they cannot pull the value of those shipments. Number of shipments denied, 321 clearance by all modes was 4,300. So the rest of the data that we asked for, Customs could not provide, like number of 321 shipments with IPR violations, the value of IPR violations. They say that their system limitation does not enable them to provide that kind of data. As far as seizure statistics go, again, system limitation, they're unable to distinguish between de minimis and standard freight shipments and express for some reason. Of the 321 shipments that required formal entry, due total value per consignee per day was greater than $800. Customs didn't keep track of that in 2023. So that was for the non-express imports. Looking at express, we separated it out by origin country, and there was 190 million via express of just total 321 shipments. And Customs put a note that all express shipments are considered air and processed at their facility. So just for air, there was 6 million, over 6 million. Number of 321 shipments express via manifest release, 184 million. Again, another system limitation. They couldn't give us the value. And as you'll see that there are a lot of system limitations when Customs gets up on stage and says this number or that number. That's why I wanted to have numbers from Customs via FOIA to verify that. Number of 321 shipments with express with IPR violations, they said there were 14,000, a little over 14,000, and the value of those is the domestic declared value of 79 million. Estimated loss of revenue for express 321 shipments with IPR violations. Again, based on MSRP, manufactured suggested retail price value, 905 million. And then number of express shipments entered via entry type 86 was 6.3 million. Number of shipments, I'm only covering the red highlighted ones. Released via manifest release was 184 million. So again, you can see that Customs doesn't track a lot of the things that we ask in the FOIA request. Inadmissible. Number of express 321 shipments requiring formal entry due to the total value was over 800. Customs says that there were 6.5 million. deemed ineligible on the express side. And total value of those shipments was 1.5 billion. Number of shipments denied express clearance abandoned by consignee for whatever reason, 14,000. Express shipments requiring formal entry due to the total value per consignee per day was greater than $800, was a little over 6.5 million. And then the total value of express shipments requiring formal entry due to total value over $800 was $1.5 billion. So that's just on the express side. Now let's look at mail. The total mail imports, 81,000, and we separated it out by countries of origin. But customs could not give us the value of those mail shipments. As far as IPR violations in the mail, they say there were a little over 9,000, and that value was around 73 million. So this one I thought was very interesting. Number of mail 321 shipments with IPR violations by type of violation, trademark, copyright. They referred us to the official IPR statistics that they publish every year. And in that document, IPR statistics did not distinguish between de minimis imports and mail imports, or distinguish between expresses as well. But they're saying that the loss of revenue was 219 million. As far as inadmissible goes, total number of mail shipments denied 321 was only 3,000.
So thanks, Steve. I know that covers like the majority of the Section 321 data. I appreciate you sharing that with us. Martin, can you give us the global perspective on what's going on with the state of de minimis for our participants?
Yeah, it won't come as a surprise to anybody on this call that the e-commerce explosion is a global situation and not just something which is focused upon the USA. And, you know, in Europe and Asia and other parts of the world, we're seeing this massive explosion of the likes of Temu and Shein with their incredibly low value commodities being shipped around the world. There's been a undercurrent of, well, firstly, let's take a step backwards. De minimis for decades has been seen as a great thing. It was introduced basically because the revenues that were being collected from these low value shipments exceeded the cost of the collection of those commodities. And as part of improved trade facilitation around the world, the de minimis levels were introduced slowly in many countries, but some countries grasped them right at the very start of it to help facilitate trade and basically allow customs officials to focus upon what was deemed at that moment in time as being higher risk commodities or shipments coming into those countries. So it has for many years been seen as a very good thing. The other thing which I think is important to point out from a global perspective is that in many countries, the sales tax, the VAT, the GST has, in countries outside of the USA, it's been collected at the point of entry. So where you do the import declaration for the import duty to be calculated and collected. It was also the point where the sales tax or the VAT would have been calculated in those countries as well. And when you look at the European Union as example, we've got VAT rates ranging from 17% at the low end up to 27%. So if you look at a 27% sales tax being applied on a €100 or €150 shipment, that starts to exceed the cost of collecting that revenue. So it becomes a monetary win as well. Having said that, in the last 6 years, we've seen at least 37 countries around the world do something with their de minimis level. They've either stopped it altogether, they've dropped elements of it, or they've put secondary controls against those levels, which I guess we'll touch on in a few moments' time. But this has been driven really because of, in my opinion, trust and data. The ones from the from the freight forwarders, the integrators on this call will realize that we've been bashing a drum about improved data accuracy for many, many years, and it's failed to come. We've seen undervaluation, we've seen classification of goods, misdescription of goods, and we've seen some bad actors out there actually using it as a way of defrauding governments of revenue. So something had to be done. And I think we're starting to see really a little bit of a de minimis revolution take place around the world. I think that's probably enough at this stage, Cindy, and I've got some more points to add to that in a while.
Thanks, Martin. And Rich, given your government background, and I know you're not speaking on behalf of the government, but I think you have a really good perspective of what they are concerned about. Give us the current state from the government perspective in your opinion.
I'd go back to part of what Martin said as my starting point. This is it. The new aspect here is the focus on it, right? I mean, we've been dealing with this for 10 years, going back easily 10 years in my time in CCS. And a large part of it is exactly what Martin suggested. It was duty issues, IPR issues, a lot of things. But again, you look at what CBP has to do, it's a multi-mission organization. And all aspects of that mission have crosscuts with what goes on in de minimis and customs. And we can talk about the numbers, but, recently they said 92% of inbound cargo now comes in de minimis by volume. And when you look at the missions, right, national security, and we've seen what's occurred recently now, we have enhanced ACAS that has been worked on since the incendiary events in Europe and Express, right? So now, the agency has to deal with that in this environment. So they've looked for more data. They're going to look for, accurate data, I think, to go to part of the point that Steve was raising in terms of the output of the statistics. Maybe the agency hasn't done as great a job as need be in the past with that. I think you're going to see that change now because, mission number one is security and their threats there. The response was enhanced ACAS. Narcotics. I know that the agency's been all over talking about fentanyl and the fentanyl crisis, right? A lot of that comes through small packages. We know it. Some of it's legitimate, can be turned into, illicit articles. Some of it is illicit from the get-go. But unfortunately, it's a fast, secure way to deliver your product. And the smuggler loves nothing more than fast, secure delivery. Okay. But customs is now under pressure to deal with that. And again, the nexus, when you're talking about 92% of all inbound cargo and de minimis, it's right there. The agency has an agriculture mission. And I remember my days specifically in San Francisco, we were gateway to the Central Valley in California. It was mission critical for us out there to intercept. You would not believe the stuff that comes in these packages, either deliberately introduced, the seeds and other sorts of things, which are pretty exotic, but also dangerous, but also inadvertently based on where the product comes from and what might have been picked up on the outside of the package. And the agriculture specialists were fantastic at picking that up. And I'll also give kudos to them for finding narcotics, which they did well too. Those three missions right there alone in the nexus with 92% inbound cargo. Then you throw on top of that trade compliance. The agency alone by itself has to do with UFOPA. And there's always been this myth about the great enforcement there, but what about all the product coming in de minimis, the shirts with cotton and all the other articles that maybe have a touch point there? Now, the agency's going to probably wind up looking even more so in the de minimis realm because that's part of the mission. Intellectual property was discussed. It's there. There's no doubt about it, whether it's knockoffs in any variety, whether it's apparel or tech or entertainment stuff that's coming through. That's mission critical for the agency as well. You have to also think about technology transfer. That's been a focus lately, specifically in terms of outbound, but I can see it coming more on the inbound realm as well because of a lot of things that get done And the concern that's been addressed any number of ways within the federal government about certain technologies coming into the states for communication, for surveillance, for things like this that could very well come in a small package. So the agency is going to be focused on that as well, I think. And then you have all the health and safety issues. You know, Customs has said 85% of the violations they find in health and safety are in de minimis. And the agency enforces for any number of other agencies, right? FDA specifically. And in our express facilities and our mail facilities, FDA is front and center there. I can't tell you how many packages wind up going their way for clearance because they're looking at, you know, pharmaceuticals. Are they legit? Are they standard, et cetera? So that is part of it. Also comes into IPR as well, but they're looking for things like that. And then you have CPSC because you look at what comes through de minimis toys and things like this that have a health and safety issue too. So there's a great deal of interest there. And when you're talking 4 million a day and that nexus with customs, and now on top of that, let's not ignore the one critical part that, you know, it was more critical, I think, for in other countries, but I think now for customs, it could very well be a duty issue. Okay, you're talking about these sort of trade war tariff issues, you know, 100%, 200%, and now we're talking 60, 65% in Mexico. And again, whether that's hyperbole or political, you know, grandstanding, we don't know yet. It's, you know, time will tell. But if it gets down to that sort of situation, well, customs is a revenue protector as well. You throw that mission in there, 4 million packages a day. The agency is going to have its hands full. 20 to 23,000 officers to deal with that, most of whom aren't really dealing with that and could very well be diverted to other things if we have mass deportations. I would suggest that I saw the poll, it was about 60% say a moderate to important impact. There are a lot of optimists out there, I think, right now. But that's kind of from my perspective, what I see with the agency, and just from my own experience in there, what I think the agency is going to be looking at is a lot more focus on it, a lot more intense focus. And to go to Steve's point, I think part of it will be they're going to really have to be tracking closely what goes on in terms of the enforcement aspects here. They're going to be accountable for it. So they're going to be a lot more, they're going to be under the microscope, which means that scrutiny is going to run outward as well.
Yeah. And, you know, I think that one of the things that I see get a lot of play in the press or in discussions is how customs is challenged to physically examine cargo in a non-express environment that's de minimis. If you think about the express process, those packages come in bulk and they're separated immediately off the plane. And when customs tags an individual package, they you know, are be able to the express carriers can present that package to CBP immediately. And it's done right away. It's done on a belt. They get to look at just that package. The amount of de minimis and express remains around 20%, and their volume hasn't gone significantly up, where the huge amount of volume in the de minimis environment has been in the normal air environment and then in the truck environment, a little bit in ocean. And when we look at that, you know, if you think about how those are packaged, even a normal commercial carrier has their UDL package. And if CBP wants to look at one of the 4,000 packages in there, that has to be taken somewhere. It has to be broken down. It has to be looked at and then put back together and then you know, moved onward in its journey. So I think that also a challenge for CBP, and it's also why you can see some statistics better in the express environment where that's been going on a longer time than you can now. So we've touched a little bit on the current state. We've touched a little bit on the concerns. You know, Steve, what do you think? What's going to change? What are we looking at in the future? You know, what are some of the concerns of the participants in the normal de minimis environment, non-express environment, like your company is participating in? You know, what are the concerns and what do we think is going to happen?
One of the main concerns is what I can talk about outside of the NDA that, you know, I have with Customs on the various committees that I participate in is Customs is looking at how to capture $800 per day per consignee with multiple modes of transportation, truck, ocean, air, not much by rail, if anything, but the three main modes is how's customs going to calculate that one consignee is not going to receive more than $800 per day, regardless of mode of transportation. And they're basing this on this new estimated date of arrival. So they're talking about various concepts of how to capture that data, how to permit some shipments, not permit some shipments, force some shipments into entry type 11 if that one ultimate consignee is over the $800 limit. So that's in a big discussion right now. And it's going to affect us heavily because, they're talking about issuing warning messages that, hey, this ultimate consignee may be over $800. You may have to file type 11. We won't find that out till after arrival sometimes. So that's where I see the main thing. The FOIA stats show that the trade of what customs is capturing is 98.2% compliant. And that's express, that's mail, that's the commercial side. Where the problems really are is the mail, in my humble opinion. And I think customs needs to really focus on mail more than the commercial side, as well as come up with a trusted trader type program. For the marketplaces that are compliant, like some of our clients that are very good, I mean, our examination rate is less than 0.02%. So with the clients that we work with that are very compliant, I guess getting back to main concerns is how do they manage and capture $800 per day for ultimate consignees? And then what's Trump going to do? Nobody knows what Trump's going to do, right? That's one of the main concerns. Is he going to end de minimis altogether? Is he going to put a $2 fee on every shipment? Who knows what he's going to do?
Yeah, I keep saying if anyone says they know what Trump's going to do, they're lying because no one knows, and it
No one
changes
knows.
day by day. So, Martin, from the global perspective, what are you hearing from, some of your shipper clients? What are you hearing in the international arena about, what's going on, what's going to happen, how that's going to change? What are the main concerns there?
It's quite interesting, actually, Cindy, because the rest of the world since 2018, or a lot of the world, has been exposed to these changes. I mean, if you go back to 2018, it sort of started with Australia knocking down the GST de minimis on imports into Australia. That came as a shock. New Zealand did the same. But we've almost become, outside of the USA, accustomed to the change. And we've had a number of countries out there, such as Turkey, that have just gradually wiped out the de minimis from being a mediocre de minimis down to zero. What we saw happen in the European Union and the United Kingdom a few years back, they initially wiped out the VAT de minimis, so we're used to it. But now we've got the EU customs reform looming in 2028, and rumors say that they're going to bring certain elements of it possibly forward, which also include the de minimis part of it. They're going for a total removal of the €150 de minimis by 2028. But they're not only doing that, they're also looking to perhaps create 4 or 5 classification pots, where if you want an expedited clearance, you pay a flat rate, higher rate duty to have those goods cleared quickly in those pots, or you go through the normal clearance process. So what we're seeing happening, and there's been an awful lot of traction in the USA over the last 12 months. And there's lots of different motivations. As an outsider looking in, You know, one day it's the Stop Act and it's about, you know, fentanyl and opioids. Another day I see the textile sectors all saying that there's a flood through Xi'an and the likes of very, very cheap textiles coming into the USA. So I guess we're a little bit more hardened to it. The question will be the volumes. You know, the volumes are so large. And I'll full transparency here. I sit on the UPU, the Universal Postal Union's consultative committee, as a private sector member of that. So I do have some insight to the postal volumes as well. But yeah, the volumes are huge. And I think that is the greatest concern, that if you change anything, if you drop the limit, if you close that channel down, if you move it into a different clearance type, it's the volumes that scares us outsiders looking into the USA.
Cindy, one more thing I wanted to mention is something else we need to be aware of for change. There are 6 bills in Congress right now that affect some form of de minimis, either eliminating it altogether, eliminating China, putting fees on. And, you know, one of the ones that I hope will change next year is that de minimis will be permitted out of foreign trade zones. That'll be a game changer. And we should have that. We should have that because we know there are platforms in Canada and Mexico that ship de minimis across the border right now with Chinese origin. So I just wanted to throw that one thought in before you go to Richard.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I appreciate that. And we know all of those bills require more data. So that's going to be, I think, a minimum moving forward. So Rich, you talked about enhanced ACAS. And I think it's been out in the press, you know, why enhanced ACAS actually came to be. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means and how it impacts shippers and how it impacts those importers that are actually taking part in de minimis, but also, you know, more broadly in air freight altogether?
Yeah, I think again, it's just pretty much it's straightforward in the sense that it's simply the provision of more data, so customs can do a much more vigorous job of screening and targeting, and then, you know, in the end, looking at what needs to be looked at, so that you maintain the velocity without disrupting the business practice, and then you mitigate the risk as much as possible. But, you know, I think the data only goes so far, because in the end, to really validate it, you have to pop the package, okay? And I think, you know, eventually, I think customs is going to have to go to something that Steve mentioned in this arena, and that's the trusted trader concept, writ a little differently than we did when we did CTPAT. And that would be, I think, a lot more in terms of, you know, CTPAT was about logistic security. How do you fill that? Now it's more, I think, about what is actually in that package, right? So I think the trusted trader concept here would have to work in terms of pre-vetting a lot of the items, the product, and things like that. And, you know, that's upfront work. I think customs probably needs to look at doing things a little bit differently with Express. And I'm a little more skeptical than Steve. I know mail is a problem, having dealt with that specifically. But, you know, there are other issues out there too that the Express folks deal with, and they deal with it in their way. But the problems are pretty broad, or the challenges and risks are pretty broad. But I think customs needs to look at the trusted trader concept. I think, you know, when it gets down to resources applied, they probably should take a look at something along the lines of a center dedicated to mail and express, to kind of build expertise that needs to be there in terms of the players involved, what they do, how they do business, a little more subtle intelligence than is currently there, so that a lot of the data coming in makes sense. Because again, it's only data unless you actually pop the package. Nobody can pop 4 million packages a day. It isn't going to happen. So I think they need to take a look at doing things that way a little bit differently, because the business models are there. That tidal wave has hit. It isn't going to change. Okay. And I know there's the introduction of the bills on the Hill about that, but I just don't see once let's be honest here, once the politics get involved, I don't see that changing a great deal. Now, the China bashing is part and parcel of today's environment. It makes no difference in terms of who's there in the administration. We know that makes up a large part of the minimis environment. But the movement away, I don't really think, and I've seen a lot of that lately where, everybody's talking about, we'll move to Vietnam, we'll move to here, we'll move to there. But customs is going to go, okay, was it transshipped now? So it's just basically you just change something and then customs says, look at the risks. So I really think it's going to have to move down that continuum of a trusted trader concept, pre-vetted. And that's going to involve a lot of, the kind of I hate saying artificial intelligence because I'm an old school guy, because I don't think anything replaces actual intelligence, but I do think that that's going to have to be part and parcel of how customs deals with this, because as we said earlier, it's a multi-mission organization. The risks are all over the board with de minimis because of the speed, because of the volume, and I think customs needs to kind of think about it differently in that regard to deal with it.
Thanks, Rich. I know, the volumes in de minimis are really driven by consumer behavior. It's not driven by any one industry or any one, carrier or participant. It really is driven by the fact that consumers want, cheap things. They want it quickly. They want it delivered to their house. And they are willing to pay a little extra for the transportation to get that sometimes. It's an avenue. I have young adults in that are my children, and when we talk about their buying habits versus what I used to purchase when I was younger, clothes are cheaper. They're more cheaply made, but they're more affordable for, my kids. And when they're young adults just starting out in their careers, it really does make a difference that they have affordable items. And I think, that's driving a lot of this, not necessarily anything else other than, we carry a computer in our pocket that I can, with 2 or 3 clicks can, get something delivered to my door. And all of the express services know my doorstop very well at this point in the Christmas shopping. But one of
well, I was going to say, I don't think that's an insignificant point, because, the conversation here has the aura of, oh, de minimis was this thing created by cartels and terrorists, et cetera, and it's not. It's just obviously, it was a business process. It was a business model that has worked, and it's worked to the consumer's interest. And the businesses that have built models, small, medium-sized businesses that have built models around this, and it's worked well for them. It just so happens that, like many things out there that work well, there's always somebody who's going to try to take advantage of it. Challenge that customs face. How do we pull those advantage takers out of this equation so that those that are just simply doing, as you said, just doing business and doing the best they can do as consumers are still able to do that? And that's, again, one thing we learned back in 2001 and 2 with CTPAT was CBP cannot do that by itself. And that's why I think going back to things like a trusted trader concept, maybe even a C focused on express, mail, de minimis, et cetera, is a way to work that. But I think your point is not insignificant. It's not, this wasn't created by smugglers and everybody else to try to, flood the market with illicit narcotics and illicit goods, et cetera. It's a legitimate business process.
And I think I'll be very quick, Cindy. I think you raise a great point there, in the sense that what's the problem? What is the defined problem that's trying to be fixed here? In Europe, they had a 10.5 billion euro black hole of missing revenue. What they introduced, it's not closed to 10.5 billion, but it's closed 3.5 billion of that 10.5 billion, and it's a work in progress. So they had a defined problem that they were trying to fix. Not there yet, but they're sort of semi on course for doing it. And that's what I see as being missing. And, Steve said about the 6 different bills going through, the government at this moment in time. That creates confusion rather than clarity. And I think this is what you need to make a sound business decision.
Yeah, I agree with that, Martin, and thank you for bringing up that point. I think, as we contemplate our last question, I want to say, customs really needs to learn this process a little bit better. The last major revolution in how things were shipped was really containerization. Before that time, things came in bulk or, in a manner that allowed inspection at a port, and then containerization happened. And that changed the way not only the freight was handled, but also the way customs had to approach how they were going to evaluate what was coming into the United States. And I really think this is the next big wave of change in how goods are coming into the United States. Whether they get rid of de minimis or not, people are still going to buy online, and they're going to have individual packages coming from overseas, and how those are presented to CBP really seems to be a key part of that challenge. So with that in mind, we'll do a round of questions here. Steve, to you, what if de minimis is eliminated? Who's going to be most affected? And how is that going to change, your business, your customer's business moving forward?
If it's totally eliminated, I worry that it's going to hurt the ultimate consumer. There's been a lot of SMEs that have built businesses on this, and if it's taken away, then they're going to have to just up their prices to the ultimate consumer. That's my biggest worry is, again, you're just increasing costs to the ultimate consumer. And I'm actually advising clients to put like a Trump majeure clause in their contracts that in the event Trump raises tariffs, we have the ability to charge more for our product.
Do you think there's going to be a challenge in getting that data? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that's something that there's a certain level of data that's required, but if you go to a formal entry process, much more data is going to be required. Can you talk a little bit about how that's going to be a challenge?
Especially for PGAs, we won't have the data before arrival. Right now, we have to file entry type 86 before arrival. If the merchandise is subject to PGA, sometimes you can't get that from the shipper. You have to get it from the consignee. So then that's going to force you to file a type 11 or a type 01. It's going to really increase the burden and work on the customs brokerage community.
Thanks. And Martin, you talked a little bit about internationally, the goal to remove de minimis, and some countries have already removed de minimis. What do you see the international impact if the U.S. moves in that regard and eliminates de minimis into the United States?
Well, it's like Steve said, it's going to be you and me, the people actually buying those commodities. It's going to be the poor old SMEs struggling to make a living and trying to be entrepreneurs and grow their businesses, and it's going to be the customs authorities. But we're trying to handle these volumes still with the poor data quality. And there was a publication in the UK called The Lodestar that had an article or an interview with Todd Owing, came out today. And I'll just quote a paragraph from that publication. And he says, drug smugglers, big surprise, don't accurately tell you what's in the shipment, and they don't care about the value. So they don't care whether the de minimis is $200 or $800. They are playing in volumes. And, Steve alluded to it, and, I alluded to it earlier on. Data is the new currency. And if you've got a weak pipeline, and this is where Rich's comments about trusted traders and everything else comes into play, it's a weak pipeline. And bad data is bad data. And you can't open 4 million packages a day to check.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You can't do that. So, Rich, what's going to happen to CBP if de minimis goes away and you now have, let's assume volumes don't go down significantly, because I don't think they will. You know, if I'm buying a shirt for $17, you know, $3 more isn't going to make that big of a difference for me. So if we assume the volumes are not going to go down, what is the impact to CBP? And how do they handle, you know, that amount of volume in a normal entry environment? Because it seems to me that the examination challenge is still there.
The examination challenge is there and then some. That's on steroids at that point, because, you know, I'm listening, especially with Martin's comments, you know, the problem customs is going to face is the scrutiny they're going to be under, okay, in terms of, well, what are the results are we getting? Are we seeing less fentanyl? Are we seeing less of this, less of that? And again, let's talk, even if it's something as simple as duty. What's the impact there? If they're looking at duty generation, if tariffs are punitive, you know, yeah, the shirt coming in is only valued at X amount. The package is valued less than $800. But when you start to add 4 million a day, now we're talking a significant amount of duty. The scrutiny they will be under to deal with that will be scrutiny. The pressure will be brutal. I don't see any other way to put it. You know, one of the things that we saw when I was still in was what they call the master carton smuggling, right? You got one box, oh, it's X. In that box with 1,000 shipments, and now all of a sudden you're dealing with 1,001. The resources aren't there, one, to examine it. And, you know, the data is only as good as what goes in. The only way to validate and verify it is to pop the package. There's no way 4 million a day can be popped and checked. So what will be looked at are the results. Is fentanyl still coming in at the volumes? If the answer is yes, the pressure goes up on customs to stop it. How do they do that? The only way to do it at that point is to look at more. Where do they find the bodies to do that? I have no idea. If duty is the issue, it becomes an issue. If revenue generation, it's the same thing. You're relying on the data. You can you know, assess the duty based on the description, but what are you really getting there? You're protecting the revenue? I don't know. Again, it's only as good as the data. If it's health and safety, it's the same thing. So I think as the volumes continue to increase and as the you know, the political scrutiny and pressure on this goes up, customs could be faced with really an extremely difficult mission at that point. And then again, that isn't even talking about the fact that we know that, you know, we were talking before that the world right now is looking pretty messy. And those sorts of situations are where customs was put together to deal with, right? A security perspective. We know what was introduced in Europe in the air environment. And now you look at the unsettled situation in the Mideast. You don't know what's really going on now, even in Asia. Customs cannot take its eye off that ball. If they do, then what happens next? I wouldn't even want to think about that in terms of the impact on, you know, having to stop almost every package and screen it either with technology, which I think needs to be part of this discussion. How do you do that to make sure it's not the worst case scenario? Any technologies that can then trace and track for other things. So I think they're going to be under a great deal of pressure to deal with that as this becomes more complicated, and they've got to react, I think, and I think they will. They're very smart people. I can say safely, we were all trained to do this over the last 20 years. Deal with it in a measured fashion. They cannot deal with it in a vacuum. They have a lot of people out there who know these processes. Those, you know, 3 of you guys are on this call, right, on this webinar right now. And a lot of the folks listening are, whether it's brokers, forwarders, carriers, you know, IAC, direct. These are folks customs needs to sit down with and discuss. And it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be pleasant. It's not going to be polite in a lot of ways, but it has to be done that way. If they're going to, you know, we haven't focused on the partnership concept a lot the last few years, but I think it needs to be reinvigorated and quickly, very quickly, to deal with this, because it's not going away. And the variables now are much different than they were. And trade war was not something I remember anybody talking about in my 30 plus years. It comes up now all the time. Throw in all the other stuff, and yeah, it's going to be complex, to say the least.
Yeah, and thanks, Rich. We have one more closing poll for you. How confident are you in your organization's ability to manage potential changes? Just a reminder, if you have questions, put them in. We have several questions. If we can't get to all of them, we'll get back to you with some of the answers for those. One of the questions here, do you see any new budget for CBP that will focus on resources and technology in the near future? And I want to take a stab at that question because I think a lot of people don't really understand this. Tariffs and duties go to the general fund. They do not actually go to CBP directly. So if de minimis were eliminated, that doesn't mean that CBP is going to get any different budget allocations in the new administration. And also, Rich, I think you're touching on the technical needs. Technology is going to be needed with the volume increase. I don't think we talked about that at all today, but another question, how might de minimis rule influence the flow of goods from countries with high e-commerce volumes like China? And will this result in a decrease in the overall import volume? Steve, Rich, I don't know who wants to try to answer that.
I'll take a stab at that one. We've already seen a decrease in the volume from China over the last 2 years. So, that's just in the statistics. As far as de minimis goes, we've seen an increase, but we've seen a decrease in standard shipping from China.
Rich, did you have a...
Well, I think I would agree with Steve. I think the numbers are actually showing there have been reductions in the export volumes out of China. I think that probably continues. I think given the level of scrutiny, and look, in the end, let's just be blunt. That's what, forced labor was all about. Get out of China, right? I mean, there's no sense in sugarcoating that one. And in the end, that seems to be the aim, but that may in fact just simply be transferring the challenge from one, country of origin to another. They're going to go somewhere because that process is still going to continue. I don't think the volumes will change necessarily just because they move from China to Vietnam. Then customs will scrutinize for transshipment. And smugglers will go, all right, well, if we can't do this way, we go here, right? So all it really does is seems to me is just transfer the challenge to a different country of origin, if you will. I think the volumes probably stay the same.
Yeah, I think so too. And Martin, we have a question here from the postal side. You mentioned that you're on the board of the advisory board for UPU. From the postal side, if we look at the STOP Act, that has been a big issue for CBP with loads of country exceptions. How do you understand how postal de minimis will be viewed? And I know from experience that the UPU has very regimented and detailed agreements between the countries on what data can be issued and what data can be shared. So I'd be interested, Martin, in hearing your perspective on the challenges in the postal environment.
Okay, I'll start by picking up on one of your comments there, the exceptions. I think there was something like about 150 exemptions from the regulations for the STOP Act, and some of those included some of the most focused countries now. The likes of China also got an exemption from some of the requirements. So those exemptions are, as I understand it, starting to wear off. What I will say as far as the post offices are concerned, and it varies greatly between the more mature post offices and the less developed post offices, there is a massive surge in trying to facilitate improved data collection around the world. And I know from a hurricane background, we're actually working with about 35 post offices trying to help them improve their export data, not just e-commerce data, but their export data in general. But it's a hard slog. They've come from decades, hundreds of years of super simplifications. And now they're being asked to catch up with the freight forwarders and the integrators with the quality of data capture. So they're trying very hard, but it's a big job.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And with just 1 minute to go, if we didn't get to your question, we'll try to get those out to the attendees so that you hear our thoughts on the issues that you've brought up. As mentioned on the slide, this webinar has been approved for accreditation credit, so you'll get information on how to do that. You're also going to get a short survey from AAI. Let us know how we did. Let us know, how you think this helped and any future ideas for other webinars. Speaking of webinars, AAEI does have 2 coming up. The Chevron deference that may have a huge impact on the deference given to regulatory agencies in the rulemaking process. It's a major change from areas that, for the past couple of decades where we've operated under the Chevron deference. So lots of interest in that. And then the AI and tariff code classification, which solutions are right for you. Please, go to aaei.org/webinars to get more information on these, or simply utilize the barcode there. With that, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Apex Logistics, our panelists. Thank you all for joining. And of course, thank you for everyone attending. Wish you a happy holiday season and a happy new year, and hope to see you again on a webinar soon. Thank you very much.